On June 5, 1995, Nintendo released Earthbound in the US for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Landing at a time of generational change, it was a game that nobody was expecting and really didn't know what to think about it or what to do with it either. It was an exciting time, and each game offered its own unique experience, a new world full of surprises. Every day held the promise of something new and great. However, in nearly every case, you had some idea of what you were getting into. Recognizable characters and licenses were everywhere, and even if something was new to you, the box art or title was enough to carry that extra weight. With Earthbound, well, it's quite a long story. Earthbound was the brainchild of Shigesato Itoi, a celebrity in Japan, one whose status made him a household name long before Earthbound. His fame is hard to explain or quantify. Perhaps he is most well known for his commercials, having produced dozens of advertisements that are still remembered today. Or it could be his authorship, writing multiple tomes of essays and short stories. He even writes the Japanese editions of I Spy. It could be his television appearances, where Shigesato Itoi has been a mainstay, often appearing as a host or commentator, while taking in occasional character roles. He even provided the voice of Tatsuo Kusakabe in the film My Neighbor Totoro. So how did Shigesato Itoi, a modern-day Renaissance man, come to make a video game in the first place? He was naturally a fan of them. Itoi had long suffered from asthma, which forced him to lie down when he found it difficult to breathe. He played video games to pass the time when his condition kept him up late at night. As an established ad wizard, Itoi was eventually invited to Nintendo to develop commercials on their behalf. But Itoi, ever vigilant, had brought another proposal to the meeting, an idea for his own video game. The marketing department was surprised to see a celebrity excited enough about video games to have a concept ready to go, so he was sent to Shigeru Miyamoto, where the two discussed the idea further. Miyamoto was a little wary as he took game development seriously, and ordered Shigesato Itoi to return with more ideas, hoping that it would drive the development of a game into something playable, or have him realize the amount of effort required and just let the concept die a natural death. Itoi returned with binders full of text, designs, stories, and characters. Others within Nintendo had not expected him to have such an involved role, or be so gung-ho about it. Celebrities in gaming were something still rather new, and often ended up as a minor contribution, just a name on the box. Instead, Itoi would spearhead his idea for a game, working side by side with Miyamoto to bring his vision to reality. The work resulted in the formation of a proper studio, Ape. Other Shigesato Itoi games would come from there later. The project took over 2 years to complete, and rather than bore you with a long, detailed list of points that the game was going to be, or at one point had, but then changed, the core concepts always remained that the game would be one that Shigesato Itoi himself would enjoy playing, and a game that was unique and unusual. Something in a grand scope that hadn't been realized in games just yet. The end result was Mother, a role-playing game that defied the genre and many of its conventions, while also poking fun at itself and anything else that made its way into the game. As an RPG, the typical medieval sword and sorcery elements were abandoned for a 20th century world. The heroes are not some prophetic warriors, but schoolchildren. Weapons and items are not swords, shields, and talismans, but baseball bats, frying pans, and other household objects. Although Mother was a game by and for the Japanese, the setting was American. Well, American-ish. The idyllic image of America that Japanese often imagine. But like the old saying goes, it's good enough for jazz. The graphics are drawn at an angle, rather than top-down, and the game has a soundtrack composed and performed by outsider musicians who are not in the gaming industry, handling music with the approach of a typical album, even including lyrics that would not be heard within the game. The star of Mother is a young boy, maybe about 10 to 12 years old. He doesn't really have a name. You can assume the role of the hero. He's often called Ninten. He lives with his family in the small town of Mother's Day in 1988. One night, Ninten is attacked by a ghost in his bed. He quickly learns that his great-grandfather once studied mysterious magic powers, known as Sai, and that it all ties into some incident that happened 80 years ago. Ninten is urged by his father to search out across America to investigate more. Along the way, he meets Queen Mary, ruler of a far-off land, who asks the boy to search out the 8 parts of a song she has stuck in her head. Ninten meets up with other kids, Anna, Lloyd, and Teddy, not to mention many locals who live in all the places they visit. As if ghosts, magic, and far-off lands aren't enough, aliens are added to the mix. But if I say too much more, that might spoil the game for those of you who haven't tried it out yet. When Mother was released on July 27, 1989, the family computer was at its peak. The Super Famicom was on the horizon, but had just been officially delayed, in typical Nintendo fashion. It left a wide open space for Mother to land and be scooped up by a public that was looking for the next great game, and were also intrigued at the idea of one created by Shigesato Itoi himself. Backed by a very lifelike ad campaign that, strangely, was not handled by Itoi, Mother exceeded expectations, selling over 400,000 units. It also drew positive reviews for its unusual setting and strange type of humor that had rarely been seen in games before. Though to be fair, the simple graphics and steep difficulty were often criticized. That kind of impact drew the attention of Nintendo of America, who were somewhat independent in their choice of game releases, but always relied on the home office in Japan for source material. The American Nintendo had struck gold every time when choosing the right titles to import, with a helping hand from their promotional arm, Nintendo Fun Club News, and later, Nintendo Power magazine. It was Nintendo who brought Dragon Quest stateside in 1989 as Dragon Warrior, offering not only a full English translation, but done so with a medieval Shakespearean bent, along with many gameplay refinements and graphical enhancements. Detailed reviews were published for about 2 years, and eventually, Nintendo gave the game away to loyal subscribers. In 1990, Nintendo of America did it again with Final Fantasy. That game was also given a full translation and in-depth coverage. Final Fantasy also had multiple contests in Nintendo Power after release to keep the visibility of the game high. Nintendo had plans to release Mother in the US, keeping in the tradition it had recently established. Nintendo has fun in 1991, read the headline. In a short blurb, it was all laid out. A new game, Earthbound, was coming from Japan. It plays like Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy, but is set in the modern day and is also a little weird and funny. While everything else on this page saw the light of day in 1991, Earthbound did not. It was unusual that Earthbound never came to be, because Nintendo Power always played close to the vest. Yet, in a time before the internet, a much more peaceful time than now, the news of Earthbound slowly became lost to time. No one ever knew, but Nintendo had big plans for Earthbound in 1991. An 80-page strategy guide was in the works, as well as a full soundtrack album for the game, something that was commonplace in Japan, but unheard of in America. Not to mention that, yet again, a lengthy RPG was getting an English translation. So why did so much effort go into a game only to never sell it? Earthbound did not have the visual appeal of other NES games. The graphics were very flat, and objects had a minimal number of colors. Then there was the fact that Earthbound was simply a weird game. An RPG that wasn't, except that it still was, set in a campy parody of America that didn't make a lot of sense. In the US, RPGs were not the cultural force they were in Japan, but because of Nintendo of America's own efforts, the genre had a foothold on the NES. Yet there was still no telling what the reaction would be in 1991 to a game like this. The public might have rejected Earthbound for being too strange and not of the same mold as Dragon Warrior or Final Fantasy. That would have left a lot of unsold cartridges in a warehouse, along with guides and soundtracks. A huge monetary loss for sure, but a failure in Earthbound would have also tarnished the carefully crafted image Nintendo had been building as the gold standard of video games in America since October 1985. Has Nintendo ever released a bad game? No! And they weren't going to start anytime soon. It's like how the old saying in radio goes, no one remembers the songs you don't play, only the bad ones that you do.
まで泣くんじゃない。名作保証マザーついに大完成。
Shigesato Itoi returned to video games in 1993 with a Super Famicom version of Monopoly. He was a fan of the board game and at the time served as president of the Japanese Monopoly Association and was ranked as one of the top 10 Monopoly players in the world. His version featured some unique elements and was different than the ones sold in the West, though I would be hard-pressed to call it an original game, especially when following in the footsteps of Mother. All the while, a second Mother game had always been in the works. The staff was a little different this time around. Satoru Iwata took over the role of producer and programmer, bringing HAL Laboratory along to co-develop the game with Ape. The composers from the first Mother were back. Shigesato Itoi was still the writer and director. Almost everyone else was new. Again, without giving a laundry list that you could easily find on the internet, the game went through several revisions and was on the chopping block for a while, as the next Mother aimlessly floated along. News of Mother 2 would pop up now and then, only to be met with delay after delay after delay, finally reaching the store shelves of Japan on August 27, 1994, after 5 years of development. Again, the game was praised for its unique take on role-playing games, and its use of satire and humor. Mother 2 became one of the top 10 best-selling Super Famicom games of 1994, selling over 500,000 units. Once again, Nintendo of America took notice. The lay of the land was much different in the 16-bit era. The average age of gamers had gone up. The culture had changed. Nintendo was losing to Sega in the ever-important, never-ending console war. Nintendo was no longer cautious and guarded, instead charging ahead with guns blazing. Figuratively. Was yanking Earthbound the wrong decision after all? The game was once referenced in Nintendo Power as a favorite, despite never officially existing. Maybe the public could handle such an off-the-wall game, after all. Nintendo of America stepped up once again to bring Mother 2 stateside, with a release set for the summer of 1995. Having the original Earthbound as a guide, the team at Nintendo of America got to work bringing the game to life, in English. Among the differences between the Japanese Mother and NES Earthbound were names of towns and locales. Nintendo's hometown was called Mother's Day. Other areas like Thanksgiving and Santa Claus Station don't make any sense in English, but sound funny in Japanese. I guess it would be like if an American made a game about Japan and called the towns Origamiville and Sushiopolis. Nintendo of America curbed things back by renaming towns to things like Podunk and Youngtown, which strike a better tone. Holy Loli Mountain was renamed Mount Itoi in honor of the creator of this world, whom the audience had never heard of. All the American changes to the NES Earthbound went directly back to Shigesato Itoi for approval. Some of this must have rubbed off on him because in Mother 2, the locations have a tone that made a little better sense in English, and therefore were kept mostly the same between regions. Tucson is one example that's very clever. A few things had their spellings changed, but hardly anything required a full reinvention. One of the few major changes was renaming the band Tonzura Brothers to the Runaway Five. However, some things had to go. Logos and references that were a little too close to real American trademarks were slightly altered, like the big red delivery truck. Game mechanics were refined over the original Mother, namely the menu system and interactions with objects. The difficulty was turned down to a reasonable level. Battles are not random anymore, and if you reach a certain level, the battle ends automatically. Music was a key feature again. The concept of capturing different melodies remained central to the game. With more memory and a much better sound chip, Mother 2 makes use of music very well, with a great backbeat running throughout the game, atmospheric noises wherever needed, and many memorable tracks that make you just want to stop and listen half the time. When the American Mother 2 was all tightened up and ready to go, Nintendo of America decided to reuse the original title from a few years ago, Earthbound. This time, written as one word. What Americans saw on June 5, 1995 was something out of a 1950s sci-fi movie. In the year 1990X, a meteorite crash lands in a small town somewhere in Eagle Land. A young boy, Ness, and his neighbor, Pokey, investigate the site. The meteorite is actually a spaceship where the alien inside explains that a powerful entity, Gigas, a character from the original Mother, had turned the world into a hateful place, and the only way to stop him is to collect melodies from sound stones that are located in sanctuaries around the world. On his quest for these sound stones, Ness befriends Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, who tag along. Together, they travel to many far-off lands and meet some strange characters. Mr. Saturn and Apple Kid are just two of many. The families of some of these characters get the spotlight as well, all except Ness's dad, who is never actually seen because he's always at work. Much like those original plans from 1991, Earthbound came with a free strategy guide, clocking in at 130 pages, and done in the style of other guides Nintendo Power had been making for several years. Inside, scratch and sniff cards were included that featured character profiles and tips. Nintendo offered an air freshener as a prize for those who could guess the scents correctly. The size of the guide necessitated a larger box than usual, just like the one Mario Paint had. The image was abstract, but does deliver on the game inside. By the time 1995 rolled around, Nintendo had entirely revamped their late 80s kid-friendly image for something more real and raw. The Play It Loud campaign had begun about 1 year earlier. The ads were jarring, flashy, and sometimes a little grody too. It was a time when advertising in general was unconventional, as Generation X kids rejected conformity and commercialism, making anti-ads a worthy technique in getting the message across. "This game stinks," read the advertisement, referring to the scratch and sniff cards, as well as some of the enemies that, if real, would smell awful. But a second tagline also piqued some curiosities. "Cut this coupon, not the cheese." The game stinks so much, Nintendo offered a $10 coupon in the ad as an apology. Nintendo never made a bad game, right? So what are they talking about? Nintendo Power went even further by covering Earthbound in the style of the Weekly World News. Alien invasion. A 13-year-old boy is the only hope left for the world. Other than the small print that clarified that this was a game review, the reader had no idea what was going on, almost like War of the Worlds. The whole thing was very well orchestrated and aligned with other ad campaigns of the time, like Donkey Kong Country and Yoshi's Island. But without the visible profile those games had, Earthbound's advertising hung around in the background for a while, then faded away. Reviews in 1995 were unkind to Earthbound. GamePro issued a score of 3.5 out of 5. And this is from a magazine that gave out perfect scores like candy. The review said the graphics in Earthbound were short, squashed, and simple. The plot lacked a convincing storyline that will make serious RPG fans a little cautious about approaching, and that the humor is too mature for little kids, while the gameplay is too immature for older gamers. So this one is bound to fall to earth sometime soon. Game Players magazine gave Earthbound a score of 69% in July 1995. If that was a high school test, you'd fail. The review said, the whole game is colorful and simple, and intended for younger gamers, but that makes it look kind of flat and dry, with battles that look like throwbacks to the 8-bit Dragon Warrior days, while stating that the in-game humor is Earthbound's biggest strength. Overall, it ain't bad, but it ain't real exciting either. Electronic Gaming Monthly, the gold standard of American gaming media, didn't even bother to review the game. These reviews had some truth to them. 1995 was the best year the Super NES ever had. Lots of games were 24 or 32 megabits and featured graphics that were unimaginable back in 1991. Earthbound was 24 megs too, but it sure didn't look like it. The game at best resembles SimCity. In the 21st century, you can say gameplay over graphics all you want, but that was not the order of the day in 1995. So you have this game that's cute and unassuming with some really dark elements. A cult that loves the color blue, stoner hippies, gangsters, and Dungeon Man. I don't even want to go there. You could say the game is very subversive, so you'd expect some pretty intense dialogue, but many of the characters just babble nonsense. Fuzzy pickles? Probably the worst line in all of video games. The enemies are very strange, like Dolly's clock from the painting The Persistence of Memory. Funny, but I doubt kids can understand. So maybe these things are for adults to laugh at. But it's hard to fall deep into a game with characters named Mr. Belch and Pooh. Pooh? Why name him that? Yes, it's obviously a reference to Teddy from Mother 1 because both Teddy and Pooh are real-life bears, and that's the joke, I guess. But since the first game was erased from existence, who would know that? So what do you think when you see the name Pooh? We know the answer. The game is so incongruent, nothing comes together like players expect. Many other RPGs start out kind of vague and mysterious, but eventually everything clicks for that aha moment where it all makes sense. Earthbound just doesn't have that. It was very easy to chalk it up to a mismatch of cultures or a bad translation, then make an immediate beeline for any of the other games from 1995. Retail numbers show that Earthbound was not a success. The game didn't break the 150,000 mark in the US, even with a $10 coupon. The price was cut to $30 at the end of 1995, and unsold stock that still hung around into 1996 were given away at clearance prices. And Nintendo swept this mess under the rug, quietly moving on.
兄ちゃんどうなってんの？
わかんね
兄ちゃんどうしよう。
え。俺たちまた。
大人も子供もお姉さんもスーパーファミコンソフトマザー2。
In the years following Earthbound, Shigesato Itoi was eager to continue the series. A third mother was announced for the N64, with news appearing in 1997 and 99, and even scheduled for the year 2000. During all that wasted development time, Itoi was being his usual eccentric self, developing a fishing game for the N64, and setting up his own online news site, the almost daily Itoi News, at the hilarious address of 1101.com. On the other side of the world, the fan base of Earthbound actually increased after the game had crashed and burned. The retirement of the Super NES coincided with the rise of video game emulation. With a fast enough computer and a 56K modem, every game from yesteryear was available for free. Legally, it's a gray zone. In the eyes of Nintendo, it's the eighth deadly sin. With the entire Super NES library available, those not in the know took notice of Earthbound and finding others who were doing the same. Armed with dial-up modems and way too much free time, Earthbound fans in the 90s formed a sacred brotherhood of enlightenment, bound by GeoCities sites, bad clip art, and the unshakable belief that they alone got it. And that the rest of the world just wasn't ready for non sequiturs, talking dogs, barf that was self-aware, zombies that engaged in the world's oldest profession, and a workaholic dad who never slept. By the end of the 90s, intrepid fans were able to locate the original NES Earthbound prototype from 1991 and distribute it online. All the while, the cult following of Earthbound grew and grew. Effectively, becoming a cult of its own, trying to convince everyone to give Earthbound a chance and see why they thought this misunderstood title was actually the greatest game in human history. Out of the blue, in 2003, Nintendo announced that Mother 1 and 2 would be re-released for the Game Boy Advance, like oh so many other titles from the Super NES days had been. Mother 1 retains its 8-bit design, rather than getting a facelift like Final Fantasy Advance. Most internal changes are for the first game, like pushing L to talk, which is a great time saver. Minor things like extra maps and changes to some text colors help make gameplay a little smoother. Mother 2 had much less tinkering done with it, but had a few tweaks. Strangely, the Earthbound prototype that was discovered proves that many changes made by Nintendo of America were retained on Mother 1 and 2 for the Game Boy Advance. When this fact was discovered, it lifted the hearts of many Earthbounders that a full American release was imminent, and that surely the world outside of Japan would finally realize the genius of this game series. Earthbound 0 and 1 would become the next Final Fantasy VII, rewriting the rules forever and reshaping the landscape of gaming in its own image. When the advertisements for Mother 1 and 2 went public, it came with the announcement that Mother 3 was in fact still in development and would come to the Game Boy Advance soon. Although soon, to Shigesato Itoi, doesn't mean soon like we think. The Earthbounders managed to rally some 30,000 members of their ranks to sign a written petition to Nintendo of America to convince them that Mother 3 would succeed where Earthbound didn't. Do you know what happened with that giant petition? Nothing! I know the Earthbound cult is crazy, but are they stupid too? This is Nintendo, the same company that pulled the Mario 2 Doki Doki Panic switcheroo, the chip shortage, lawsuits over game rentals, censorship over crosses, bloods, cigarettes, biggins, and 10 years of black and white Game Boy games. All just to deny you any extra fun. And this little love letter is going to change anything at Nintendo? They don't care what you think. Released in April 2006, Mother 3 is a bit different. The game is broken up into chapters and features a variety of characters, rather than one lead like NES or Ninten. Some characters are also adults, and the Anytown USA charm is toned down, while the typical weirdness is still there. If there was one lead character, it would be Lucas, who must fight the Pig Mask Army, who have invaded and want to conquer the Nowhere Islands. A group of mystical beings called Ma Gypsies guard 7 needles that keep a powerful dark dragon sealed away. The Pig Mask Army and Lucas fight for control over these needles, and effectively, the world. In America, there were faint signs of life into 2007, but it was clear that the age of the Advance was over in the face of the Nintendo DS, which, I recall, literally printed money. So what were the chances of ever seeing Mother 3 in English? 2006 saw 2 major events that kept the flame alive for those in the Earthbound cult. The Nintendo Wii, released that year, had a novel feature, Virtual Console. For only a few dollars, you could download classic NES and Super NES games. With many first-party games ready from the start and others coming each month, it was only a matter of time before every game would be available on the service, which would just have to include the Earthbound games. There was also WiiWare for new games that were often smaller and sold less than games on disc. Mother 3 could stand right next to a game like Mega Man 9 with no problem. The other event was the addition of a charismatic leader on the Nintendo team. A guy named Reggie was appointed president of Nintendo of America in 2006. Not since the days of Howard Phillips did Nintendo have someone who was friendly and approachable, always ready to open up a dialogue with fans. Everywhere he went, he was constantly harassed about this game.
I'm still being bombarded by Mother fans who are asking for that title to be translated into English and launched here in the US.
I can understand the plight of the Earthbounders to an extent, because everyone has at least one game that was left behind in Japan. You know, like Cosmic Fantasy 3. But give the guy a break. It's like calling up a top 40 radio station and asking them to play Do the Vampire by Superdrag. It ain't happening. I have no proof, but I am certain that Reggie was always saying to himself, if Earthbound meant so much to you, why didn't you buy it in 1995? Oh, you weren't born yet? Well, that's not my problem. What made things worse was that Mother characters started appearing in Smash Brothers games. NES was unlockable in the very first one, and each installment afterwards, there were multiple characters, items, stages, and music that were Mother-themed. Even Lucas from Mother 3 was included after 2006, rubbing it right in your face. Ha ha, you can't play the game this guy is from. It had to hurt. But inside I had to laugh a little, because again, it shows how little Nintendo actually cares about you, which is to say, they don't. At all. Especially when other, only in Japan characters in Smash Bros. Had later games with a worldwide release. I don't even think Fire Emblem Dreamers bothered to write a petition, and look what they got. Still, Mother and Earthbound never appeared on the Wii, not even in Japan. I never followed the daily goings-on of the efforts to get these games moving, but it had to drive these people insane. When the Wii gave way to the Wii U, the first few rounds of Virtual Console games were given away for next to nothing. Among these was Mother 2, only in Japan, and only for 30 yen. In April 2013, that equaled 30 cents US. Of course I bought Mother 2 immediately. What a steal! I can also imagine the reaction in the rest of the world, where people are pulling their hair out over how unfair the whole thing was. I suppose things were made better 2 years later, when Shigesato Itoi himself announced that, yes, finally, Mother 1 was coming to the Wii U worldwide on June 15th, 2015, to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the American release of Earthbound, officially titled Earthbound Beginnings. Fully grown adult men openly wept over a video game. Keep in mind this was a game that had been available on the internet for free for at least 15 years, and to know its existence means that you had to very likely have played it already. But I guess in the moment, that didn't matter. In 2022, the 2 Earthbound games came to Nintendo Switch Online, where they will be available to paid subscribers for all eternity. And in 2024, Mother 3 was added to the service. Once more, only in Japan.
泣ける泣けますね。なんかあんなうるっとくると思わなかった。危ない危ない。仕事柄セリフに引き込まれるところがあって、その一行一行が重いですよね。単純にゲームって思えない。切ない。
ゲームボーイアドバンスマザー3。
Looking back on the journey of Earthbound, the chain of events on the American side really was the best outcome possible, even if many don't like it. If the NES Earthbound, now known as Earthbound Beginnings, had delivered the fun in 1991, things would have ended there. Earthbound Beginnings is very clunky and difficult. The Dragon Quest I style menu is outdated. It's frustrating to move up in the game too. Things like having to put your card in the ATM machine and withdraw cash over and over, constantly walking back and forth, is a headache. It costs money to call up your father to save the game. It's all very emblematic of something that is a running theme in this game, and also what seems to attract people to it too. The idea of X, Y, and Z aren't in role-playing games, so let's put those in there because nobody else does. That also ties into the weirdness of the series. It's not bad, but it really feels forced a lot of the time. Weird for the sake of being weird. Oh, look at this quirky game. They've never done this before, so it has to be good, right? Collecting the 8 melodies in the game is not very different from 8 pieces of Triforce or 4 elemental crystals. Many games are the same concept dressed up in different ways. The story and the mechanics need to carry the player to the end and make the journey worthwhile. But there is very little joy in struggling to level grind, with very few hints on what to do next, wandering a world that is confusing and doesn't offer much escapism. The reaction in 1991 would have likely been the same, or worse, than 1995. That would have made Nintendo of America certainly pass on Mother 2, leaving the better game out in the cold, and less for newcomers to dig up in the future. Mother 3 would be in an even worse position. We also had a much better game in 1991, where a modern-day American boy with a baseball bat saves the world from aliens. Star Tropics. The Big N never used to put out more than 1 game at a time. Imagine a world where we got Mother, but missed out on Star Tropics. How sad would that be? None of it really matters much anymore these days. I guess it all comes down to Mother 3 appearing in English on Nintendo Switch Online someday. I guess we won't know until it happens. But until then, I'm reminded of a sampler that used to hang on my grandmother's wall. May all your dreams come true, except for one, so you'll always have something to strive for.